Welcome to In a Nutshell, the podcast dedicated to all things agricultural consulting. I'm Dylan Brush here with soil genius and ag consultant Bill Brush, and we're delighted to accompany you on this journey where we break down the different aspects of agricultural consulting. In each episode, we'll dive into the realm of agriculture through the eyes of Bill Brush, where consultants like Bill play a vital role in empowering farmers, agribusiness, and agricultural organizations. If you're passionate about agriculture, problem solving, and enjoy a little bit of detective work, this podcast is tailor-made for you.
Hi everyone, this is Bill Brush and welcome back to In a Nutshell. Today we're going to talk more about some gardening aspects, not so much in the growing part, but getting prepared and how you want to set up your garden and how you'll go about it going forward and for great success. Through this episode today, I'll talk about my pros and cons and some of the experience I've had that have been both positive and negative. And how you learn from negative feedback is sometimes as important as it is to get all positive feedbacks. I talked about last time is setting up a plot, and today what I'm going to talk about is a kind of a standardization of a size. And a good size plot is a 20 by 20 square, or you can have, two 10 by 10s, but to get able to get to that garden and easier around it, because normally the easiest way to do it if you're constrained is to have a raised bed, which means you can take the easiest being a wood base and using something like a 2x6 and maybe two of them, one stacked on top of the other one. And then you can line the inside of this either 10 by 10 or 20 by 20 with plastic so that you don't have weed pressure coming from down below. You're retaining the water. You're not oozing out past your garden space. And you really contain everything within your garden plot. One of the things that in what I'll call production ag, where the major part of the food growers of the world, we either deal with acres or hectares. An acre is about a little less than half a hectare. It's about a 2.2 acres in a hectare. So you can see it's just a little bit less. But we're going to talk mostly about what an acre is. And I talked earlier on one of the earlier podcasts that an acre essentially is 43,560 square feet in that acre. And when you start to put out a garden, an acre is a big plot for a garden. But if that 20 by 20 square I'm talking about, and like I say, it can be broken up into smaller little quadrants, but you're still looking at a 20 by 20 is 400 square foot. So an acre is almost 109 times larger than your 20 by 20 garden that you're going to try to put together. Well, why is this important? Well, it's important from the fact that you have a finite amount of soil within your garden plot. Many times I've talked about the importance of having a soil test and having an idea of what's in my soil and how that's going to pertain. And we're going to talk quite a bit today about how and why knowing what's in my soil is so important. Because one of the things people always think about when they think about any type of nutrition or nutrient management, they always think about, I'm short of something, I need to add it. The problem with soil is if you add a lot more, you now have excesses. And excesses can begin to block out other nutrients and making just as big a problem as if you had not enough. So we can always add up to the point that we want to get to the what we'll call excellent fertility levels on all the different nutrients. But if I don't have a good soil sample, I don't have a target. So what am I aiming at? How much do I need in the way of calcium, magnesium, phosphorus, the micronutrients, sulfur, those things that are going to be essential for growing really good crops? And yet I have no idea how much is there. So what do? We just start throwing things at it. You're not going to be successful long term. I always tell people one of the things about some things that you may add that are bad is that they work. And people always look at me funny when I say, they work. Isn't that what we're looking for? But instead, what I mean is they work today for this crop season, but you haven't really either haven't fixed it or you've reached a hidden hunger and now you've satisfied that, but now you've blasted way beyond it and you'll begin to have detrimental effects from what you did. So if I haven't heard me enough, I will emphasize it over and over about having a good representation of your soil for your garden plot to a lab and test it for the proper nutrition, and then come back and try to put the proper nutrition. One of the things I've seen about gardens that some people have a kind of a problem doing is they don't understand that a lot of things, when we're putting them on our garden plot, we're usually either not applying at all because we don't know we're short of them. That's one. Or two, well, this isn't very much material. I'll just apply the whole thing over. And I'm going to show some of those fallacies that will really make your garden not successful. So when we look at our soil test, and that's why I keep coming back to it, you need to know what we call the exchange capacity. Either we call it the cation exchange capacity or the total exchange capacity. And what that really tells you is the level of clay, the amount of clay that you have in your soil. And why that's so important is so many of these nutrients, particularly your calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium, are basically tied to that exchange capacity. So we're going to take a base saturation and we'll go through a little exercise and kind of show you what I mean by this. If you put we'll go back to our 400 square foot or 20 by 20 garden plot, and you put on 20 pounds of an ag lime that's ground up very nice and fine, and you spread that 20 pounds over your garden plot. On an acreage basis, that's almost 2,200 pounds per acre of what you applied. So a lot of people, you'll buy a 50-pound bag of lime because that's kind of the unit they're sold in, even if it's 25 pounds. What you're looking at is, well, I'm going to spread the whole thing because what am I going to do with the rest of it? So you put it out there and you shoot by what you're looking to actually achieve, which is getting your calcium up in the high 60s. So we'll look at your soil test and say you start with a base saturation of 60 on your soil test and your exchange capacity is a 10, and we want to move that up to 68 to give us the proper texture, the proper porosity, the proper soil structure to allow for micronutrients and microbial activity to be released and given back to those plants. We want that aeration to go in there. We want our water to go into the ground. So we want that pore space opened up by the proper amount of calcium tied to that clay particle. So if you do that, you want to go, and your exchange is 10, and you want to go up that 8%, you basically, if you put that on and moved it up on an acre basis, you would put on almost 1,100 pounds. But remember, we're only 109th or 109 times less than that is our garden plot. So what you really need to put on is almost 10 pounds, 9.79 to be exact. So you can see if you get a 20-pound bag on a light sandy soil, which is a really nice sandy loam, you're going to way over apply. You're going to double what you put. So you're going to double what you need. So then you begin to run into excesses of calcium that then drives down magnesium and potassium. And so you don't have a balance that you're looking for. Conversely, if you put on with the same amount, and we'll look at a exchange capacity of 20, moving from 60 to 68%, that same 8%, they basically would need on an acre 2,133 pounds, okay? So you can see it's really twice as much. It makes sense because I have twice as much clay, so I'm going to need twice as much calcium to change that balance, okay? But if I divide that by 109, which is how much smaller my plot is, I need 19.57. So if I had a 20-pound bag like we talked about, okay, it's going to achieve pretty much what I want it to do. If I have a 50-pound bag, then I'm probably looking some for now and some maybe later when I need to do some further corrections. Most calcium or limestone that you get is 30% calcium, and it can be more and it can be less. So you got to check that because we're really putting on pounds of calcium, not just necessarily percentages. And if you did that, there would be 600 pounds of calcium per ton of material. Well, obviously on a garden, we're not putting tons, we're putting pounds, and you equate that back, and you're going to be putting on roughly 109 times that. So you're only going to be putting on, like I say, that 150 pounds of calcium or so that we're going to need. Now, that's why exchange capacity is so critical, and it's the first thing you need to look on your soil test, because all of these other nutrients and how much we need to apply are going to be based on those base saturations, those percentages of clay that's on that deposited on that clay of calcium, magnesium, potassium, sodium, other bases, and if we have an acidic, well, how much hydrogen's there. That will give you a total exchange. In a just a normal cation exchange capacity, they will scatter the rest of those amongst your four major cations and exclude hydrogen. Okay, so that's one issue of trying to get the right amount placed into your garden. You know, it's easy to apply too much. It's very difficult to try to get that to be removed back out. Almost impossible. So you have to go in and get it done beginning and go cautiously forward. Okay, we just don't want to go to the end right away. We want to get there over a period of applications. Okay, the other thing is that in a small block like that, you know, parts per million, they add up quickly, because if we put it on an acre of soil, we look at the top 6 to 7 inches of that soil, which is the same depth that you would have in your garden or more, but you still would be measuring that top 6. It weighs approximately 2 million pounds in an acre. Remember, you're only, 109th part of an acre is what this 400 square foot or 20 by 20 piece is. So if you buy a dry granular boron, most typical one is one that's called Granubor, and it's a 15% boron. So that's what you're really looking at, the actual amount of boron that's in that. So say you bought a 5-pound bag, okay? And that 5-pound bag would give you essentially 3/4 of a pound of active or actual boron. Yeah, that's not very much, is it? But that's per acre. We would be applying that. That's what you would be getting on 3/4 of a pound per acre if you put that 5 pounds on. And then you're going to divide that by 2 million pounds, and you're actually putting on 0.375. This will get confusing, and one of the things I'm seeing as I'm going through some of these gardens is that we're looking for the need to go to a video podcast as well as these audios to be able to actually line it out and put it out onto equation formats onto a board, so that you can actually refer back to those later and see how this math is accomplished. But if you decided, well, I have 5 pounds here and I'm going to put on just 1 pound of it on my plot, I'm actually putting 2 times the most I'd ever want in that soil, which would be 2 parts per million. And I'm going to be putting on 4 parts per million on my soil on a per acre basis. So I'm way over. So anything that's sensitive to boron, anything that we may have problems when it gets into excess and hurts you, is going to be exacerbated by this, because now I have to either use it, which plants use very little of it. They just need this right amount in the right ratio to be able to take it up at the proper levels to do all of their reproductive and transfer of carbohydrates from the leaves into the fruit, or whatever their reproductive body is. So you have now going to have to grow it out, or you're going to have to put tons of water and try to leach it through, because boron will be leachable. And all you're looking at is, if you take out a pound of anything and put it out onto 400 square foot, it doesn't look like very much. But that, in essence, is what you want to do. And that's why I recommend, when you start to get down, the more you can get to, once you get away from what I call the soil amendments, the lime, gypsum, dolomite, those particular materials, I like going to liquids. And the reason I like going to liquids, and I'll use the same reference to boron, I can get a gallon of what we call boric acid or borisol, which is about 10%. So every gallon, if it weighs around, and it's pretty close, 10 pounds per gallon, then at 10% of that, I've got basically a pound per gallon in that boron. Well, I can easily measure out a few ounces, get the amount of boron I want to apply per acre, and do a lot of math to tell you I'm going to put it on. And rather than trying to spread it evenly, what I can able to do is spray it on, very evenly applied. Now I have a really good source of boron that's there, and I can go back later in the year and put a few ounces into several gallons of water and then fertigate that with that. And so you can meet your boron needs a much easier way for what I would say the gardener can do than one that's trying to do dry material. And that gallon would last you, as I'm telling you, just quite a long time. So the next thing we want to talk about when you get into gardening is that expenses per acre can be astronomical. And what do I mean by that? You have 109th, a little over 100th or a little less than 100th of an acre that you're doing it. So if you're putting on something that's $40 an acre, you're putting on something that's $400 an acre on your plot. And that's just 100 times more because you have that. So that's why you don't need near as much. And people have a tendency, if a little's good, a lot's much better. And it's one of the things I've talked to a lot of groups when I've spoke to them. And I call it the moron approach. If I have a little does good, then more on is going to do better. And it really is not the way, this is a measured program that will get you maximum results if you'll follow those basic things of taking your products, putting it on at the proper level. If you're going to make a mistake, err on the side of being conservative and not put too much. Better to be too little than too much because I can add it later. If I'm already look at a glass of that you're going to put some ice in, you're going to put 2 or 3 products. If I all of a sudden just put too much of any one, there's not enough place for those other last 2 or 3 ingredients that I was going to put in there because I filled up the glass. That's the way your soil. Look at it as a glass. Is it half empty? Is it half full? Is it 3/4 full? I don't want to overfill it, so I always am leaving space to fill the glass with everything in the proper percentages. Another thing you'll get into when you're doing gardening, it's much easier to do your gardening without the use of harsh pesticides. Particularly, an easy way to look at it is one person can easily go out there and hand weed and take out the weed population. So no need for herbicides in your garden because you can pull those weeds, and if you do it when they're young and tender, it's not a big job. But if I go out there and I want to do that and that's one person doing this, well, if I have an acre, then I'd need to do the same amount of work. I need 109 people. And if I was going to do 1,000 acres, I need 100,000 people to be able to do the same work that would be taken in your plot. So this scale as it goes up is a lot of the reasons that we'll see in modern agriculture, the use of some type of pesticides, those being softer and less toxic is what we're probably looking for. Most everything is trending that way because consumers wanting less and less pesticides in their food. But some of these things are just on the basis of just being practical and how do we get the work done on larger scales. I know that even if you were up to an acre, you would find that you would struggle to have all the weeds taken care of by hand or hoeing or whatever on an acre of ground. And you can imagine 1,000 times that. So when you're looking at these small plots, you can make them very clean, very friendly. You can plant some things around the outside edge, which we're seeing more and more of the commercial agriculture planting border areas and border rows with pollination things that are there, or flowers, and attracting beneficials that compete with the insects that are damaging your crop. We're able to do that. We're going to talk down the road on gardens of of what those are. What are those products that you may want to plant along the edge? One, it makes your garden look a little prettier, with some blooming flowers in there, but it's also attracting positive, beneficial insects to your garden plot, making it less necessary. And if we get, one of the huge things I want to accomplish if you're going to be into gardening is to give you a garden that is healthy, because we have made a very fertile soil that we can keep fertile by working on what we remove, tilling back in more carbon material to help try to build up organic matter, and over time build soil humus. Those are the kind of things we can continue to do over a long period of time. But we have to start with a blank canvas and then move forward from there. And we've talked in our previous episodes about all the different nutrients and what those nutrients do. Now we're going to do in our gardening segments here, showing people how and why we apply those, and sometimes the timing with which we apply those, why it is so important as we look at individual crops. Probably in our next segment, you'll probably listen to me talk about what crops you should put in your garden, what you would like to do, and what is possible, and what's not practical, And some things are seasonal. They're seasonal for a reason. We'll talk more about that in our next podcast. But hopefully you're getting an idea as we go together, because I'm going to tell you, I have had bad experiences. I've had phenomenal experiences in gardening, and it all comes back to I didn't spend enough time with attention to detail. I had a very, very poor experience with some really light sandy soil, and it had been incorporated with lots and lots of organic matter, the good stuff you'll buy at a normal hardware store will have a lot of carbon material, and work that in and get it going. But ultimately, I didn't have enough clay in this soil, and it made it almost impossible to get enough nutrients into my crops, whether they be, if you're looking at those things that leach, like nitrogen and sulfur being very important for the manufacture of complex carbohydrates or sugars, you can see all of a sudden the tomatoes weren't very sweet. I wasn't getting the same amount of growth that I should do because my nitrogen was leaching through an excessive sandy soil. So that's why this exchange capacity, I'll come back to it one final time before I close here. It is essential that you know the volume of clay that you have in your soil. If you have a 20 by 20 for this 400 square foot I've been using as a model that you can model your garden after, whether it's smaller or larger, if you look at what we call the aerobic zone, which is that 6 3/4 inches from the top down, in that 400 square foot, you have 18,365 pounds of soil. It's equivalent, if you have an acre, to have 2 million pounds in that acre. So it's a high volume. It's a very, very large amount. So if you're trying to put this somewhere, remember, on that small 400 square foot, you're going to put 9 tons of weight. And it's going to weigh more when you start to add water. And so it's going to be a massive amount. So make sure what you're putting it on top of can support that kind of weight. I always recommend to set it out on an open area, whether it be soil, an open spot of patch that you have that's not growing anything, and then put your raised bed on top of that, rather than trying to work something that may be very, very tough. If you don't have that area, maybe it's on concrete, maybe it's on asphalt. Those would also be able to support this weight. So make sure you do that. So that's all I'm going to talk about today for today's podcast. We'll get back to you soon with another one, talking about seasonal vegetables and fruits and what you need to do and what to look for then. So until then, good gardening.
Thank you for another fantastic episode of Agriculture in a Nutshell, Bill. I'm sure that everyone listening very much so enjoyed what you had to say about some more gardening tips and tricks. To everyone who's listening, be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and let us know if you'd like more episodes on gardening. In the future, we do plan on moving to a more video format so that some of the visuals that Bill's talking about are more easily seen. So stay tuned for future episodes with video recordings. And as always, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and always stay curious.